Welcome to the Get Real Movies podcast. My name is Daniel Chadwick Shubat. I am your host, and this is episode 16, where we will be talking to Thomas Valles about McFarland, USA. McFarland, USA was a 2015 film starring Kevin Costner. It was a wonderful true story about a high school track running team of unlikely heroes, and it was a really inspiring film to me when I first saw it, and it still is. It's something that I really enjoyed watching. So when I started this podcast, it was actually one of the first movies that I wanted to review and potentially talk to someone about. And I did get to record this a while ago with Thomas, but sadly I had some audio issues that I just couldn't get around to fixing, but I finally found someone who's able to help me fix it, and I think it sounds really great, and I really wanted to share it with you guys because it was one of my favorite conversations that I've done in this past year, and it was filmed quite a bit ago, so I'm very excited for you to hear it. This is the final interview episode of the year. We will be doing one more episode where it'll be our top 5 films of the year. It'll be Mason and I, and we'll be joined by Michael Deniston from the Trilogy in Theory podcast, and he also does Sober Cinema. He's a great friend of the podcast, and I've known him for many years, so it's a really funny episode, and I had a great time editing it, and I'm sure you guys will have a great time listening to it. But without much further ado, I'm very, very proud to present this episode with Thomas Valles, McFarland, USA. And now it's my pleasure to introduce one of the people in the real-life movie McFarland, USA. Welcome, Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing good, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. I rewatched the movie recently, and it was really fun going back into it and learning a bit more about the story. But now I'm excited to learn a bit more about your life and the real life story. So I guess for what I'd like you to do before we get into some of the questions is maybe for people who haven't seen the movie, describe what it's about a little bit and your involvement in the story.
Well, it's based off a cross-country team that won a state championship back in 1987 when we were in high school. So I think that's, 35, 36 years ago, give or take a year. And so Disney got a hold of a script. Disney wasn't the original creator of the script. Somebody else was that invested to create a story, write a story. It was originally going to be a book about Mr. White, but then it went to the idea of it maybe being a script to be a movie someday. And the original script, it's the original script, but the original script would have been more rated R, because the original script had cussing in it and a lot more drinking than what it showed in the movie. Nobody was ever interested in investing because it's a business. Nobody ever showed any interest in investing. People looked at it, but never, the money wasn't there for it to happen until Disney purchased the script in 2011. But the original script was written like 1998, 99. So 11, 12 years after we won the state championship in 87. Mr. White was having some success with his teams after we graduated high school. He was coming up on his, I think, probably 6th or 7th state championship, and we just happened to be the first. So we were included in the script because we were the original team that won a state championship. And so Disney purchased the script in 2011, touched it up, cleaned it up to make it more of a PG family movie. And it was filmed in 2013 and released in theaters in 2015. So about, I think it's 9 years ago, 9 years ago.
Wow. So there's a real progress and a real process, to make the film in the end, and it originally even started as an R-rated film. So I guess what would you describe the experience as living it when you were part of the high school track team? Would you say it was closer to the R-rated, or would you say it's closer to the Disney version?
Yeah, you know what? Nobody's ever asked me that. I think everybody has some little R-rated stuff in their lives, but the original, any movie that's based on a true story, there's Hollywood in it, and there's things that they can't 100% portray in the movie. My character, they hint at some of the things that I grew up with, some of the challenges that I grew up with. It hints about some of the challenges the Diaz brothers, Johnny Samaniego went through. They just hint at them. And not until you actually hear it from us in person. And really the real story coming out of our mouths is I'll share this. People say it's way better than the movie, could have ever been. But it's just a hint. And because, we do get a little bit of attention because of the movie. And so people come from all over the world to visit McFarland because of the movie. I had some folks here this weekend. They were from Arizona. They were from Arizona. Last week I had a family from North Carolina. We've had people from China, Korea, Canada. We've had people from First Nation from Canada come up
Really?
to McFarland. Yes, and visit, and we gave them a tour and stuff, and then they made their trek back.
Yeah, and I think this movie is a really interesting one because that's something that I've been kind of trying to decipher in the first few episodes talking to people. And some people say, oh, the movie got it almost perfectly right. And others say, it's inspired by the real story, but it
Right.
takes a lot of liberties. So I find that there's usually a middle ground where a lot of these films are, where they try and stay true to the spirit of the story, but there's certain things they can't tell, especially if they're a Disney family movie, and there's certain things they might add to make it a bit more cinematic. Life isn't always like the movies, I guess.
I don't know if you could still purchase DVDs, because somebody just asked me to purchase DVD and send it to them. They're doing a fundraiser up in the Central Coast, and so what I did is I got a poster that it's a copy of an original. Mr. White has them, and usually when I go speak, I sell shirts and T-shirts and posters from McFarland USA, and this particular poster is a copy of an original, but it has everybody's signature on it. Mr. White's, Kevin Costner's, Mrs. White's, the Diaz parents. It has Carlos Pratt, who played my character, and has my signature, has David Diaz, and the gentleman that played his character has Danny Diaz's signature, and as well as Ramiro Rodriguez, who plays Danny in the movie.
Wow. So it seems like you are still quite tight knit with the people that you ran track with all those years ago in high school, and Mr. White as well.
Well, I went to go visit Mr. White yesterday after church, and then I came home and I was prepping a room to paint here at my house, and then Johnny messaged me and asked me if I knew this gentleman, and he had a picture of him in McFarland, of a gentleman that was visiting McFarland. They just performed at his church. It was a singing group, and they're from Texas. And says, this guy, he said he met you in Lubbock. And I'm thinking, Lubbock. Yep, that was 2 years ago. I went to a regional meet, cross country meet, because I was speaking in the area. So I went to go watch this cross country meet. Him and his brother were the DJs at at the award ceremony. And so I remember him and his brother. And so, hey, we're going to head over to Mr. White's. Why don't you join us? So late last night, I took off to Mr. White's house. And when I got there, they were serenading Mr. White. They were singing some of their songs to Mr. White out in his front yard. And so Johnny was there. And then also Danny Diaz joined us. So I got to reconnect with these two gentlemen that I had met 2 years ago. And
Wow.
but they travel the United States speaking. They sing mostly gospel music, but they sang at Johnny's church that he attends. Yeah, but I was able to reconnect with them.
It's a small world after all, even in a
Yes.
country of 300 million plus people.
Yeah.
Going into the film a bit, first of all, what did you think of Carlos Pratt's performance as yourself? Did he do a good job? Was there a lot of conversation going on between the two of you? Because obviously that's hard to play someone who maybe might be around the movie, but it might also help a lot as well.
You know what? I didn't realize that's why he called me early on before they even started filming. I did have a conversation with him over the phone, but as far as really any tips, I think he kind of read up on me enough that where he did do a good job, just by going off whatever the script provided, and I think he did a good job. Yeah, and I've talked to him a few times even after the movie came out, and he did a good job. I was happy with it.
Well, that's always good. You always want to have a good portrayal in the movie, so I'm glad you were happy with it at least. I also wanted to ask a little bit, get more into the specifics of the movie. So, when Jim White first came into McFarland, there was no track team at the time, or was there a track team? Because in the movie they presented as there being no track team, and
There was cross country. So cross country is in the fall, and that's what they show in the movie is cross country. And in the spring, it's track and field where you run around a quarter-mile track. So this was a cross country in the fall. Mr. White got hired. It was his first job here in McFarland as a science teacher, I believe fifth or sixth grade science teacher here in McFarland in 62 or 63. I think they only had one daughter at the time, and they came down from Southern California where he had just graduated from college from Pepperdine. And so this is in the early 60s. So he dabbed in working in like coaching, I think Pop Warner football. And then I think in 1980 is when he took over the high school position. So I know the movie depicts that. And so I tell kids, this is Hollywood. When I speak all over the United States, I tell this is Hollywood, guys. That Mr. White showed up in one season in 1987, and in 3 or 4 months he trained up, 7 boys to win a state championship. I tell kids that's Hollywood, because anything worth accomplishing in life takes work, effort, setting goals. And so he'd actually taken over the team in 1980, and he kind of struggled to put enough teams to do a dual meet, 7 runners against 7 more runners, other runners, like they depicted in the Clovis dual meet on the track at McFarland. And that was the track at McFarland High School. It's no longer there because they built us an all-weather track. Eventually, he started getting teams, bringing up the numbers, where he started winning league championships, and his ultimate goal was to be one of the best teams in the county. And before I got to high school, he was already known for having some of the best teams in the county. And so I did run for him in junior high. He recruited me out of junior high. He recruited all of us out of junior high. And then I ran all 4 years in high school. So the notion that I didn't have any experience running when we won state in 87, we had already ran the 3 previous years in high school before we won state. But 87 was the first state championship that California ever had. And so we knew of that the year before. Mr. White said, hey, they're talking about having a state championship, and there are going to be 3 divisions, a large school division, a medium school division, and a small school division. And we were a small school. And so we set our goal to try to win this thing. And we were already pretty good for as small of a school we were, an enrollment under 400. We kind of thought we could even, win this. And we had confidence even going into the state meet that we were going to win it.
Wow. So there's a real difference there in the movie
Yes.
and what happened in real life then, because they
Yes.
presented as he had anger management problems coming from another school. And then within a year, it's just coaching a team of people who've never run and then winning the state championship. So that's already a huge difference.
Yeah. So Mr. White, he went to college in Twin Falls, Idaho it was like a teaching college. I think, I don't want to say it's a community college, but it was to gear up kids to go into education. And so that's where he met Mrs. White. And Mrs. White was actually from Twin Falls, and they got married there in Twin Falls, Idaho. And then, so he didn't get fired from a job there for throwing a cleat and hitting some kid outside the head. And if in the movie, it ricocheted off the locker and hit him, right? So it was an accident. And so Mr. White jokingly said, no, had I actually intended to throw the shoe, I wouldn't have missed, because he was a pitcher in high school or in college. So he said, I wouldn't have missed. I would have hit him.
Oh man, that's too funny. I'm glad he had a sense of humor about that.
No,
Because if I didn't have anger management issues and they portrayed me as this angry guy, I wouldn't be too happy about it. That's too funny. And then one of my other questions is when you were training, obviously the school might not have been set up in the way it was now, where there wasn't as much money. That's something they really presented in the film. There wasn't much funding available yet, and it was kind of an ignored town. So when you were training for all these track meets and eventually the state championship, was it as alternative as they made it look in the film? Hill training on almond
covered almonds.
Yeah.
So that is Hollywood there, but those covered almonds, because the almond processing plant is just down my street, about a mile north of here. There's no covered almonds right now. I think the last almonds were hauled and processed. I think by December they're all gone. But here we are in what are we in, March, April? By May they'll be harvesting, and there'll be thousands of piles of covered almonds out there waiting to get processed. And they're there from May all the way through December, because they're there even during November, right leading up to the state championship. And teams come from Southern California. They're driving down Highway 99 to get to Fresno to the original state championship course. But it's been there for 35, 36 years now, minus the COVID year. And so teams are stopping by all day long. And we're out there giving them little tours. Mr. White's out there. Danny's available. He'll go out there. Johnny's available. He'll go out there. But I'll stay there all day long giving tours, and we'll end up going to those covered almonds just to give them an idea what they look like. And, we do tell them that was Hollywood.
That was a little artistic license there. Yes. from the director.
And so what those actors were actually running over were dirt mounds.
Yeah.
So they brought in dirt, covered it, make it look. So I think what they ran over was like 3 covered hills of dirt, and everything beyond that was actual covered almonds. But they didn't run on those because they couldn't, because they would have punched holes in the plastic exposing the almonds. And because I had that experience, one of these teams that came down from Southern California, I gave them the tour. So I took them to the high school in front of the gymnasium to see the silhouettes, and then took them to the Ranchito Market on the other side of town, on the east side of town, and then took them to where they filmed the car wash. And then the last stop is always the covered almonds. And these kids were taking pictures, and usually I tell the kids, just put one foot on the hill and pretend you're running up. We'll take your picture. Well, I encouraged one of the boys to run up to the top, and I'll take your picture. Get to the top, and I'll take your picture. And that was my first time ever telling anybody to run up to the top. But as he ran up to try to get to the top, he punched holes in the plastic and exposed the almonds. And
Okay.
and the coach got on after him and said, "Hey, did you see what you did? Now we're responsible for that." Getting on her athlete, and I told the coach, "Hey, coach, I told him to go run up to the top," and I said, "Oh, it's on you then, coach." But they came out right away and they covered it up. It was
That's good.
okay.
That's good. No, that's funny though. There were certain things when I was watching the film where I thought to myself, that seems a little far fetched, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask him about that.
So we do have hills, but we have to drive east of McFarland about 6 miles to get
Hmm.
to our hills. And then so let's see, the cameo appearance that you see us running at the very end of the movie,
Yeah.
that took place 6 miles east of McFarland. When Mr. White's doing some of the training and they're underneath the orange orchard and they're picking oranges and eating them, that's east of McFarland, about six
Wow.
miles, same area.
Was the majority of the film filmed in McFarland, or was it filmed on a lot somewhere? Or
They filmed in McFarland for 2 weeks total. The rest of it was filmed on a set in Burbank Studios, where Disney Studios is located at.
oh,
And
okay,
so they like Griffith Park is where they filmed the state meet. Our state meet has always been in Fresno. Griffith Park is the location of the Bell Jeff Invitational. Mr. White took teams there all the time after I graduated from high school. So I never in high school got to race there in high school, but I did run a 10K one year uh, after I finished running in college. I did run a 10K there. That's the only time I've ever ran there. I think I ran there with my uncle one time when I was younger, but as far as running in high school, I never raced there. Other teams did, but because Mr. White took teams to the Bell Jeff, hey, we'll do the state meet here. So they recorded it in Bell Jeff, and then the beach scenes were actually filmed in like Malibu Beach, I believe, somewhere in that area.
yeah. And it was that I was hoping that was a true story where he took you to the ocean for the first time. I don't know if that happened though either.
Yeah, so most of us we didn't get out at all. So Mr. White always had a meet that we would go to that was on the central coast of California, either the Tuscadero Invitational or the Santa Maria Invitational. Now those courses are not right on the beach, but they're close enough where it's not that far of a drive to the Pacific Ocean, and so we would go to the beach afterwards, and so that was a treat for a lot of us. For a lot of us, it was the first time seeing the beach.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And in the film, they really represent a lot of the boys that were part of the original, state winning team as some kids who had to go through a lot in their lives. A lot of them had to work, then go to school, then work again. Was that really your daily routine when it came to it? And were you running in between those times, or what was your life like growing up during that time period?
You know what? For me, I went to school and then I worked on the weekends or for sure all summer, worked in the fields with my dad. I think it says when I was 10 years old, I started going with him. And then through elementary school and then junior high, and then got to high school. But things happened in my life when then my dad was out of the picture because my parents ended up divorcing. But like the Diaz brothers who, they would, there's 2 or 3 hour delays of school when there's fog. So their parents would take them to go work in the fields in the morning if there was a 2 or 3 hour delay, and then Mrs. Diaz would drop them off, and I'm just repeating what they would say. So they would get dropped off at school all dirty, and they'd go to school with us. And then after school, we usually have practice, but some days they wouldn't go because their parents expect them to work right after school to go put in a few hours before sunset, and then they'd have to make up their practice. And Mr. White would make up their practice with them later in the evening.
Hmm. And I do have to ask, one of the funniest scenes of the film is where Kevin Costner as Mr. White goes and works with the Diaz brothers in the field. I was wondering, did that ever happen, or was that also a little bit of a funny Hollywood liberty that they took as well?
So I remember Mr. White working in the fields with us when I was going to be a freshman in high school. And so I just graduated eighth grade, and Mr. White was going to take me to a running camp, and he was going to go take me to compete in Eugene, Oregon. And, we did fundraisers. We did car washes. We'd go door to door with bucket bags. Then we'd knock on the door. Hey, can we wash your car for a donation? And we'd wash people's cars. And we'd also ask them if they had any, if we can have their recyclables, their Pepsi or Coke bottles, the tall ones. Cause back then in the mid '80s, early '80s, you'd get 10 cents for them. So if they donated them to us, then we'd go cash them in. And that's how we raised money. And so, Mr. White realized that wasn't going to be enough. So he says, I need to get you guys jobs. And so he went out to the local farmers and asked them. So we went to Mr. Cowan. I remember it's east of McFarland. He had cotton fields, and he asked him, hey, do you have any work for my boys? And I'm trying to get Thomas his first real pair of running shoes. I'm trying to take him to Oregon. And it says, Mr. Cowan said, I got work for these guys, Mr. White, but you need to be out here with them. So Mr. White was out there hoeing weeds in the cotton fields. It's called chopping cotton, but that's what we did out there during the summer. And he was out there with us.
Wow, that's really crazy. He must have been, I guess, a hell of an influence to have in your life as a young man, to have someone around you like that and have that, I guess, that impact on your life in a way.
No, he was. He was something very positive in our lives, and he still continues to be today.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really struck me the most, is that there's still the relationship there. And they show a little bit of that at the end of the movie, but just chatting with you a little bit about it and then also reading up on it, it is amazing that you're all still connected in a pretty incredible way, I guess.
No, we are.
One of the other questions that I wanted to ask you was a little bit about more of the personal aspects of the film, so the relationship aspects. First of all, I was going to ask, did you ever have a relationship with Mr. White's daughter? Because it presented it like that in the movie, but I was like, I don't know if that would have been allowed.
No, I would say that was Hollywood.
That was Hollywood as well.
Yes, sir.
I was like, that would be skirting with the line there. I'd be surprised if that happened.
I'd probably get dismissed from the team if that happened.
Yes, that's fair. That's fair. And then when we come into the running and all that, so we kind of learned some of the things that didn't happen. It was more of a gradual process towards the state championship. But when it came to that season and the season they present in the movie, first of all, one of the questions I was going to ask you was, when it came to the team, I want to ask specifically about, but also Danny Diaz and some of the other runners. Who were some of the stronger runners on your team? Was Danny one of the weaker runners? And then also I want to ask about that the state championship meet in a sec. But I'll ask you those questions first.
I think we were all strong runners. I mean, to be on a team that was the best team in the state, we were all strong runners. And if you ask Danny Diaz, the movie depicts that there was 6 guys and Danny Diaz. But you know what? But our team wasn't just the 7 guys. There was also a girls' team. There was frost off, which means these athletes were freshmen and sophomores. They were JV runners. That meant that they weren't fast enough because they weren't freshmen or sophomores. They ran JV, but they were juniors and seniors, but they weren't good enough to be on the varsity. So there was more athletes than just the 6 guys and Danny Diaz. So Danny Diaz will tell you, I was faster than all the JV guys. I was faster than all the frost off guys. So that's why I was on varsity. So I wasn't the last resort. He was the number 7 man on the team most of the year, but at the state meet, he ended up being our 5th man.
Yeah, and that was one of the more heartwarming moments of the movie, when you pick him up and everyone picks him up and everyone's hoisting him on the shoulders. It's a really awesome moment for sure.
You know what? I was the number 1 man my senior year. Johnny was number 2. But everybody always remembers, because of the movie, Danny Diaz. And so Danny Diaz is everybody's favorite runner in the movie. When I go out and speak and they say, who's your favorite runner? And they'll go, oh, you are. That's just to be nice. And I'm thinking, no, you're lying. I know everybody's favorite runner is Danny Diaz.
And everyone loves that underdog.
Yes.
For sure. And I guess when it came to the state championship, Was it what you answered the question already? Was Danny Diaz the fifth runner? So that's awesome. But
He was, and he was always our seventh man, not even our sixth. He might have been sixth once in a while, but he was more known to be our number seventh man. And um, just like in the movie, Jose Cardenas, he did go out too fast, didn't have the best race at the end there, and he gassed out, and he ended up being our seventh man that day. So him and Danny uh, switch roles really.
Danny leapfrog sixth.
Yes, yes, to fifth, yes, and but yeah, so and we knew it was devastating to us to know that Jose didn't perform for us that day because I remember um, because I was in the top 10, and the top 10 runners were going to be on the podium to get individual awards. They ushered us off to like a media center and they were interviewing us, and then they were going to do the awards. And so I had no idea if we had won or not. And we really doubted if we had won. We thought, we're probably going to be in the top three, but after Jose not running or performing, we might probably didn't win it. And I remember looking over to our principal, Mr. Ugoin, and asking him, hey, did we win? And he nodded his head to tell me, no, I don't know. I took it as no, we didn't. And I was upset. And as they're interviewing me, he says, hey, Miss Thomas, if you guys don't win as a team, does that take away your individual accomplishment today? And I go, it would, because it was always about doing this together as a team, not any individual accomplishment. So we're just waiting now. And I remember looking over at my teammate, and they're over there yelling, everybody, they're in this tree and they're yelling and they're crying. And I go, okay, something's going on. So I broke out of this holding corral that they had us to get interviewed and want to know what's going on. And they said, we'd won. And so that's pretty cool.
So it's a surprise to everyone,
Yeah.
including yourself.
Yes. Well, we shouldn't have been surprised, but we were, after Jose not having his best race, we kind of were fearful that we didn't win. We didn't finish our season like we wanted to on the top of it, being the best team in California.
And for a little added context, I wanted to ask, what sort of distances were you running in these meets? Because that wasn't really made clear in the film. So what sort of distances were you running?
We usually would race anywhere from 2 to 3 miles. Most of the races were 3 miles. The state meet was 5 kilometers, which is 3.1 miles.
Okay, and I don't know if you remember this. I'm guessing you probably do, but do you remember your time for the state championship that year?
16 minutes, 13 seconds.
Wow. 60 minutes. So you were really fast then.
Well,
because my last 5K I think I did a 23-minute one, and I was happy with that.
Well, that's faster than I can do now, but
yeah. But again, that 16-minute was a while ago. But I'm sure you could still put in a shift today if you trained for a little bit, eh?
Well, after I get off this podcast, I'm gonna get a little running.
Get a little running. So you do still actively run then?
I do. I try to go out anywhere 2 to 3 miles, 3 or 4 times a week.
Nice. So I guess some of the last questions I have in relation to the movie, you mentioned some of the things that they kind of Hollywoodized. What were some of the things that you were really happy with that they got really spot on, that were just kind of exactly like what happened in real life? And then I guess what were some of the things that you maybe wish they hadn't changed?
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I wasn't a fan of the movie when it first came out. Because there's some things, especially in my character, my family, just things you don't talk about. So in the movie, they show my dad drinking a couple of beers, and that was hard for me to watch when I first watched it the first time because, my dad was an alcoholic. My parents eventually divorced. I grew up in a home with domestic violence. My parents divorced, and all my brothers and sisters, including me, we started making poor choices. But what kept me on track was I was part of something. Mr. White continued to pick me up to go train with his high school team. I ended up running for him in junior high and then high school. And so people always ask, did they get it right? And would I, or how much Hollywood is in this movie? How much is true? And, I've heard, some of my teammates say that it's 100% true. That's not true. I've had one of my teammates say that it's 75% true, 25% Hollywood. What I shared that the movie doesn't depict the worst I had growing up in McFarland, and it doesn't depict the best. So the worst for me was not that my dad drank 2 beers. The worst because he was an alcoholic. I grew up in a home with domestic violence. They hinted that in the movie in my family. And it doesn't depict the best. So the best for us was not that we won some race, some medal, or some trophy, is what we did after that. Our education, our careers, and that we're still here in McFarland and that we raised our families here.
Yeah, and they didn't really add enough to that. I felt at the end. I know they said what was going on with a lot of your lives, and I think that was really cool. But it's almost like I wish they could have shown a little bit more of that in the film rather than just
Yeah.
at the end credits.
So most of my teammates went into education. Two of us went into law enforcement. I went into law enforcement. I'm retired now. And so what I do, because I draw a pension from the state of California, I travel throughout the United States and I speak at schools. And that's only because people ask me to, and, they ask me to do podcasts, to get on their Zooms with the classroom. But I enjoy doing it more in person. So next week I'm in Corpus Christi, Texas, speaking at an educational service center to parents, educators, and then yeah, so that's what I do, and I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's a reason to get up in the morning, and I think it's really cool that you still have that connection to your hometown and are presenting it in a positive light, because I think this movie does that in the end. But at the start, I felt like it really presented it as a town that needed saving, whereas in real life it probably wasn't as bad as they made it out to be, really.
You know what? There's positive and negative here, and we choose to talk and promote the positive stuff. Because we do have gangs, we've had homicides here, we have drugs in this community, and you know what? We're just trying to be examples for the next generation that's going to grow up through here, and hopefully they can stay on the right track and do positive things and come back and make our community more positive.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess my last question in regards to the film, I wanted to ask you, and we talked about this before the podcast, is in the movie, Kevin Costner, aka Mr. Jim White, keeps pronouncing your name Thomas Valles or Valles.
Les,
And
yes.
I just wanted you to clear that up and tell everyone how to actually pronounce your name.
Well, I pronounce it Valles. I guess if you said the name in English or Americanized it would be Velez. The only person that says it correctly is the gentleman from the George Lopez show who played my high school, Valente Rodriguez. He says my name Valles, and that's the way it's pronounced. So if you take the Spanish alphabet, there's L, which is L, and then you have Ñ, which is double L. And so that's why it's pronounced Valles, because if it was in Spanish, it'd be double L, Ñ, Valles.
And then my other part of that question is, did you ever call Mr. White Blanco? Because I think that is spot on, to be fair, because of his last name, but
right.
It sounds like you had a lot of respect for him, so.
We referred to him as Blanco, but not to his face. It was done mostly by other kids, because we have a tremendous amount of respect. We always called him Mr. White, not even Coach White. But Mr. White loved kids calling him Blanco, and now that they called him Blanco in the movie, he's 100% okay with it. In fact, there's a park that the city got a grant for, and it's like a 10-acre park, and has restrooms, has a soccer field. It's beautiful, has trees, has rolling hills and grass on it, and it's called Jim White Blanco Park.
I love that. That's a great little tidbit there. Thomas, before I do end this podcast, and I really enjoyed talking with you. Obviously, it is a film podcast, and I like to ask my guests if they have any movies that they love, either their favorite movies or movies that they just love talking about, and give some recommendations to the listeners, because I'm always looking for more movies to watch, and as I'm sure the listeners are as well. So is there any movies you could recommend to the listeners?
Well, if you're looking for a running movie, any of the Prefontaine movies. Also, if you're into conspiracies and stuff like that, and history, The Irishman. I love The Irishman. It's 3 hours long, but it's like kind of my favorite movie now.
Oh, that's a Scorsese classic
Oh,
for sure.
yes.
It's a slow burner
Yes.
for a lot of people, especially my generation, who seems to have a short attention span. But I recommend that movie highly as well. Do you like Chariots of Fire? Is that a
You know
movie
what?
that you?
I've watched, I'll be honest with you, I've never watched the whole thing through. I've watched bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
Unbroken. I love Unbroken as well.
Yes, great film. Cool. That's awesome. Before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to promote? Anything you'd like to tell the people about before I let you go?
Well, I know you're in Canada, and so I know Mr. White has gone to go speak in Canada. Anybody's interested in hearing any of us speak, we travel throughout the United States. I've gone to Mexico to speak one time, but if they can get a hold of you to get to me, that'd be fine. Or you can look me up or some of us on McFarlandUSA.biz.
.biz. And I will I'll tag your Instagram in the post as well so they can find you, and that would be great. But thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate your time and your story as well. And for everyone who hasn't seen the movie McFarland USA, I would put that up there with the great running movies as well. I really enjoyed it. So thank you again for your time.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. And for those of you going to watch McFarland, hope you watch it. Hope you enjoy it.
All right. Take care. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.